Hey guys, welcome to LaForte Daily Demos. This is going to be a Photoshop demo, just getting you started with simple area fills, painting and layers, and working on basic forms. Start with basic forms before you get into something more complex, like say, like this hammer in perspective with this hand, which I can maybe do at another time. So let's go back to, let's turn this off, save that. And where is it? Here we go. So here's a sheet, a little layout, cube, sphere, some basic geometries. This is taken from a sketchbook page on this brown paper, in fact, something like this. And I got rid of all the brown of the paper just for this demo to make it easier to communicate for values. So let's open up our layers palette. I've already got a project underway and started here, so I'm actually going to go ahead and go ahead and delete all of that. Just go right back to the beginning. So here we are, we're at the start of the image. First thing I like to do is start off by right-click on the background layer and duplicate that layer. Say OK. So now I have a working copy of the background in case I make any mistakes. On top of background, I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer, and in this layer, and I will show you by turning off these. These are the eyes. This is just visibility for your layers. I'm going to go over here to my paint bucket, and on layer 1, I'm just going to fill it with white. And this is my foreground color here on the left. That's my foreground color. So I'm just going to fill it with white, and my background is also white. I'm going to change the background here in the layer blending mode to multiply function. What that's going to do is allow all the whites in this image area to go clear, and the black will just composite with whatever underneath it. So I'm going to go back to my layer 1, and I'm going to create a new layer. That's down here at the bottom. This little icon here is for creating a new layer. Click on that. And to get started painting, we're going to zoom in. So I'm just Command plus and minus on my keyboard to zoom in. And there's a few ways to get started, but you'll figure out your own methods and an approach. I'm going to start with making a selection using the polygon lasso tool. Again, don't use the freehand lasso tool. It's just too sloppy, too difficult to control. So I'm going to start with a basic area selection. Something like that. Go ahead and click on the foreground color here, choose a color like red, and we'll go to the paint bucket and just give that a fill. So that's our base background value for this cube, right? And we need to start to articulate the different planes of this cube and refine the values for the contrast, the bevel corners that we see and things like that. Now we could manipulate all of that in this one layer. So in other words, I'm going to duplicate this layer so I don't have to do it twice. There we go. So here's one way of working. One way of working is with the lasso tool and using that background, you go ahead and you isolate this part of that background. I'm going to turn off the sketch layer, which is that. So that's really what we have. And I can take that sketch or this area fill, and with the selection on that layer, I can use levels, Command L, and I could adjust the levels. I could slide the midpoint gray. Oh, that didn't have any effect. Let's see. Oh, level is not going to work. Okay, hue and saturation, which is Command U. Again, that's under Image Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, or Command U or Control U on the PC. And in here, I can adjust the saturation. I could dull it down, or I could lighten it. That's another way to look at the plane. If I choose to move the hue, I think that's a difficult direction to go for just keeping this say a red cube. So don't go with that route. Set that back at 0 where it started from, right there, 0. Saturation at 0 over here. Sorry, I've got a calendar. There we go. Go back here. Turn that off. And I'm just going to adjust the lightness of that plane. Okay. Now that's a perfectly fine way to work, but what I like to do is actually isolate each plane and put them on separate layers. It creates a lot of layers, but you get to control them up the road a little bit more dynamically. If we were to take this a little bit further, I'm going to turn the sketch back on, and I'll take the lasso and I'll go ahead and isolate this vertical left plane, for example. Okay, and then if I do Command U or Control U and I adjust the lightness down, I start to get my plane contrast. Okay, and do that. And I'll do it one more time here for the right vertical plane. All right, Command or Control U, and this is going to be, let's make this the darkest of the three planes. So it's getting there. I need to still articulate these other three leading edges or bevels differently than these other base planes. But the problem is, if I want to adjust any of these now, I have to reselect them. So I could use the magic wand. That's an easy way to do it. I can click in that area and I can select it that way. And then I can go back to Command U or Control U and I can adjust it down a little bit, right? So I can play around it. That's one way to work. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people may prefer that method. Me, I kind of prefer to, especially with a more complex scene, I'd like to break things out into multiple parts. So in this, I'm going to call this base. That's my base background value. I'm going to create a new layer. And this time I'm going to create a new selection for the top plane. Close it up. And then go ahead and fill it with red. So there's a separate object there. I'll turn that off so you can see it's a separate plane. And I'll go ahead and create another new layer and a lasso selection of that plane. I'm just doing it again the same way. And then there's the area fill. So I'm filling that area, and you can see the little icon on the right shows me that fill area. So if I turn off the background, you can start to see the planes being developed. So this is my left vertical plane. Just click on the layer, double click on the layer to get the highlight, and then you can say horizontal top. I'm working on the cube, and in this whole scene I've got multiple images. So in the cube, I may go ahead and select all of these layers together using the Shift key, select all the layers, and then right click on them and group the layers, group from the layers that I have selected. So I'm going to call this cube. There we go. So I can keep my cube layers separated from my other objects and layers. So that's one way to organize your content as you're working. So I've got left vertical, horizontal top. I need another vertical plane here. So this time I'm going to show you a different way of going about it. We're going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to use the marquee selection tool. I'm just going to create a box right here, and using the paint bucket again, go ahead and fill that box again. It's on its own layer. And now I can use Command T or under Edit, Transform, Free Transform. And if I right click on that, I can go to Distort, and I can drag the corners to the area that I want to fit it in. Now, if you see the road ahead a little bit, you could escape and undo that. And at the moment, go ahead and duplicate that layer. So I just go over to the layer. It's a nice square, so it's a very easy, or a rectangle. It's very easy to work with. I'm going to duplicate that layer. Doesn't matter what the name is. And I'll turn that off for the moment. Or you can also go to V, which is your selection move tool up here at the top left. And I'll just move that off to the side so you can actually see it for later. I'm going to go back to my layer 2. This is going to be my right vertical. Okay, and again, Command T to transform, right click on it, distort, don't worry about the perspective function. Go ahead and just drag the corners. So this is a different way of working. Again, this is a video for beginners. This is not for advanced Photoshop where we get into other kind of vector objects and things like that. So I'm staying off of that, trying to get you familiar with area fills and things to begin with. So my right vertical plane, now that it's on its own separate layer here, right, I can just go to Command U and I'll adjust my lightness down, dull it down. If I right click on this vertical face, I can see the list of layer options in here. And this is the left vertical plane. So Command U again to bring up hue and saturation. I'm going to knock this down a touch. And I've got 3 plane contrast. Maybe I want to lighten up my top plane, the horizontal top plane. Command U again or Control U on the PC. And I'm going to slide the lightness up a little bit. Just dull it down a touch. And there it is. And then if I turn my base plane back on, you see the 3 planes, or really multiple planes with the bevels. So I can start to articulate each of these separately as well. So if I go back to this rectangle here, I'm going to again duplicate that layer. That's my kind of working copy, my original working copy. So I like to keep that separate. Here it is. And now again, I can use transform. I could rotate it now. And I can start to stretch it and fit it to that area. And you can also use the distort key or distort function. And especially in this case, because it's a perspective sketch, if I right click and hit distort, it'll allow me to position the corners right there on the marks that I need. And I hit enter to commit that. And again, Command U or Control U, and I'll just burn that out a little bit bright in this case, something like that. Okay, so I can go back to my layer 2 copy. That's this one again. I'm going to duplicate that again because I'm going to need it again. So there we go. I now have a copy of it. Now you could also go and take this layer that we created here, which is this one right there, that plane, and you could duplicate that layer. There's nothing wrong with this method. And then you can go to Edit, Transform, and flip it horizontally. And now it's pretty close to the right position, and you may need to adjust it a little bit. Now you're going to observe, this is one of the challenges with this. If you go to, Transform, Command T and Transform, and you go to Distort, you'll notice that it's creating a bounding box out here. So it's very, very difficult to reposition this corner really where you need it. It's not a vector object, it's a raster object. So it's really difficult to position this correctly. You can see I'm going to have to push and pull and tweak this a little bit here and there to get this in line. I've done a fine job for the moment, but it's not very good. If I had a more particular specific object, that definitely probably wouldn't cut it, you know. So my approach, I'm going to delete that. Just dragging that layer, I'm going to delete it. My approach is go back to your there it is. Go back to your basic shape and work off of that. It's so much easier. So Command T or Control T on the PC, right click on that, and you can go to Distort, and you can just drag the corner where you need it. So much, much easier way to work. Now this seems slow and time consuming. Practice and you'll get really fast, and you know, I'm walking you through this whole thing. So enter to commit it, Command U, Control U, and we can adjust the value of it a little bit, give it a little burnout. Go back here, I'm right clicking in the area and it gives me a list of options. I'm going to go to layer 2, it's this one. I'm going to duplicate that one more time. Okay, and there it is, and that's my leading edge right here. So again, Command T, and then you can go to Distort, or we'll get into Warp in another video. So you can just go ahead and pull the corners where it needs to go, and there you go. There we go. And then again, Command U for hues and saturation. I'm going to knock that plane down a touch. We'll make it a darker plane, something like that, between these two. It's reflecting maybe some dark object or form. So there you go. You got a pretty good idea of the multiple planes. I can turn this rough draft object off now. Two different ways of going about rendering this. Now, if I need to, maybe I like where this is at, but I want to color shift this whole thing. I don't want it to be red. An easy way to do this is you can go to your marquee selection tool, create a selection around this, and then you can go to copy merged under edit, copy merged, and paste. And it's now, I'm going to go ahead and turn all these other layers off. This is one singular object. So now I can go to Command U, hues and saturation, and I can literally just color shift the whole thing all together as one block, you know, and modify it. So as my rendering develops further along, I may do something like that if I need to. And again, I could turn my sketch back on, and now I've got a purple cube, and I didn't have to isolate each single plane to do that. So a couple different ways of working. Get familiar with it. There's easily, I say over and over, there's easily 3 or 4 different ways of doing the same exact thing. So just develop your own tricks and techniques. If you work with a tablet and a stylus, you're going to find some different methods and approaches. I'm going to go ahead and select all these again and right click and create a group from those. These are my base values. There we go. And those are inside the cube, base values. I'm now going to go ahead and create a new layer. I'm actually going to drag this up on top of the sketch, above the sketch layer. Photoshop is hierarchical, literally hierarchical, so the object above, the layer above, is literally on top of the layer below. Okay, so it's really very, very clear and very intuitive. On layer 3, I'm going to create a highlight. So I'm putting this on top of my drawing layer because I want to be able to see the glare highlight. So I'm going to go ahead and swap my colors back to black and white, swap the 2 colors, foreground and background. You can use X on the keyboard to swap the foreground and background colors. And then I'm going to use B for brush tool. And I'm just going to draw, I'm on layer 3, double check your work. I'm going to draw a little straight line. And now I can use V, selection tool. I can move that line around. Now, if I want it to be follow this edge, for example, Command T, and I just rotate that around. That's the transform function. I'm going to rotate that until it lines up with the object. Command T again to refine it. There we go. Now I've got a nice little highlight on that edge. I can use the eraser tool and erase out. There's some line over here. Right now I'm on a feathered brush. I can use a sharp edge brush and I can get a nice crisp edge or corner there. So you have some, you can play around a little bit there. So you can build highlights on in their own group package as well. So I'll do another brush, B for brush, draw a line, Command T to transform it. I'm going to rotate it this direction this time. And put it in position, right? Something like that. And if you want a little bit more of a stylized aesthetic, you can use your eraser tool and change your brush to a soft feathered brush. And you can use, you can have like a little fade in or out. You can also adjust your brush opacity up here to brush out or erase in value or in some percentage. You can also, though, go over here to your layers and you can adjust your opacity here too. So you can knock it down and soften it up a little bit so it's not quite so hot or dark or bright for you. So another way of handling it. So I'm going to go ahead and stack these or group these into group from layers, and I'm going to call these highlights. So this is just my layer management, just kind of going through, and you can see I'm turning those layers off. So go ahead and create another new layer, and this time another brush, this time another straight line, and V for my selection tool. Oh, to draw a straight line, by the way, brush, and then click and hold Shift key down and you draw a straight line. It's that simple. So, and straight line will actually be between, say, this point. I clicked right here, and I can click here and it'll draw a straight line holding the Shift key down between those 2 points. So very easy to draw straight lines. This is a very quick and easy approach and method. Command T to transform this guy. If you notice, it's grabbed, when I do transform, it's grabbing out here. That means that the layer has residue from those other lines that I had created. So if you don't like that, you could dump the layer, no problem. Create a new layer again. Go to the brush tool, B for brush. Draw the line, V to go to my selection tool, Command T to transform, and something like that. I'll move it up here so you can actually see it. There you go. And then I'll back to my eraser tool and If I want, again, if I want a sharp, crisp connection, there we go. Nice sharp kind of point. So again, I can knock that down on my opacity. I can soften it up. You can also do things like using blur. So I'll go up here to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And very difficult to see in this image, but there's the line. Well, it's in here somewhere. There it is. It's in there somewhere. It's very difficult to see it. Oh, anyway, I'm going to knock this. You can see the value here. It's the preview radio button is on here, so you can actually see what it's doing here. And you can kind of consider how much, oops, turn that back on. You can consider how much effect do you want to have on that blurring. So even though I start off with a pretty sharp line, I can actually soften and feather it down a little bit and take the edge off of it a little bit. So kind of play around with some tricks and techniques for some softer contrast values and things like that. So that's basically it. I don't want to get too far along. This is already a 20-minute video, but hopefully that gets the ball rolling for how you can manage your layers, identify your planes, and start to render out. I do want to bring your attention to one thing really fast. I'm going to go ahead and turn these all off. A lot of beginners start by rendering their objects. I'm back here on my original, actually I'll turn all my original layers off. Here's my background original sketch. And this is a very common error mistake, and I want to caution people against this right from the beginning. So let's just pick like a green color this time. People start working directly in their background drawing, their original sketch, and what they do is they take the shortcut, which is using the paint bucket. Sorry, the paint bucket and the green fill, and you just start clicking in here, and you start filling areas where the drawing is limited. And once you do this, you've literally you're painting into your sketch, and you're making a terrible mistake because you're lost. You've lost your drawing now. You're painting right into these layers and these lines, and there's no control. There's no ability to manipulate the drawing anymore from this point on. So I really want to caution you against taking that approach of just filling these areas. Whoops, you notice that it scanned the whole image there and went beyond the lines. So Paint Bucket sees an area and it will fill that area. So if I were to go with the brush tool, I'm going to make this much bigger. If I were to draw a stronger line here, like that, and then go back to the Paint Bucket, swap my color for green and fill, you can see it's filling into there. There's a threshold tolerance up here. I'm not going to get into all that right now. But anyway, it's area filling that zone. This is the worst mistake you can make to your drawings and renderings in terms of an approach. So I really caution you against doing that. Make a background copy. That's your sketch. Build your layers underneath. There's a background layer that's white that I've made, my cube, my highlights for developing it. And now I have a lot more control. As my drawing develops, I can even start to adjust down the opacity of the sketch. Eventually, if I've got enough development, I can actually reduce the sketch down to just a hint, and it'll be color mixing with my values, and eventually I wind up with a beautiful rendering. And I'm going to show you a couple examples here that are really far along. Something like this. In fact, you can, when you zoom in on this drawing, you can see the original drawing is still in here. There's still some sketch lines. The original sketch is all in here and visible. And I'll show you a car drawing as well. The original sketch of this car is in here. I wonder if I can find the original sketch layer. Well, the original background of this whole image started from that sketch right there. So the technique and the method and the approach that I just showed you, it will help you get from that to where we just were. Yeah, to this. Okay, so give it some time, give it some practice, be patient. There's a lot of other techniques and tricks that go into these two renderings. But it all starts with building up base planes, identifying and articulating those base planes, and you can develop it from there. Okay? Keep practicing and have a good time.